I'm Julie Pizzetti. I'm a journalism lecturer here at the University of Canberra. I've been teaching broadcast journalism for the past 10 years, but prior to that I worked for the ABC for a long time. And one of my colleagues was Sara, who's joined us today very graciously, giving freely of her time. And hopefully the students in the audience and the rest of you will be able to take away the sort of inspiration that Sally's storytelling provides audiences around Australia, and also the sort of inspiration that her presence provided colleagues over the years. As I said, I was one of them, and I'm really pleased that Sally's been able to join us today. She's a journalist who's worked across news and current affairs and rural areas within the ABC, reporting everything from floods to war as a result of, since becoming a foreign correspondent at the age of 29 as the ABC's very first woman dispatched to Africa. Her remit has extended to war and famine, but a whole lot of incredible tales of humanity, and it's that capacity to bring humanity and empathy to her storytelling, I think, that unites people around her work. I'll let Sally tell you a little bit more about herself. I'm not going to add anything else, but we will be going for about 40 minutes with Sally presenting essentially on the role of a journalist reporting from war zones, from conflict zones, across multiple platforms. In other words, filing for radio and television and online, and increasingly for the social web, how it's done, the practicalities of that, and the issues that a journalist working in those circumstances encounters, among them reporting on trauma and the impact of trauma on journalists and on communities. This is a lecture ostensibly designed for the journalism students who study broadcast here, and there are many of you here, I can see, but we also have members of the general public. At the end of Sally's 40-minute presentation, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. I'm going to prioritise student questions to start with, and then we'll open it up just to make sure that the students who are studying here get a fair opportunity. And they can be a bit shy, journalism students, believe it or not. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Sally.
Well, thank you very much, Julie. Just before we kick off, because I know we've got people up high and others down here, how's the sound? Is everyone hearing me okay? You can hear up the back there? Okay, that's fantastic. Well, thank you for that introduction, Julian. As many of you will know, Julie's rather a large fan of Twitter, so we've just added a new beginning slide with a hashtag for this lecture, which will I'll be judged by Twitter about how it goes well or not.
That's right. So if you're in the audience and you're online and you are on Twitter, if you're tweeting this lecture, which you're very welcome to do, use that hashtag. And what it means is other people in the community who couldn't be here will be able to follow your pithy reporting of Sally's lecture on Twitter.
Thank you. Well, I guess first up, as a journalist, I'm a pretty big fan of full disclosure. So I need to disclose at the beginning that I was a student here at the University of Canberra in 1992, and I actually failed to complete my course. So I kind of came in with the sunglasses on in case I owe people essays or something like that. I actually started getting work during that year, so I wasn't sure whether to call the lecture I failed my course but got a job as a foreign correspondent, or I failed my course and was sent to third world countries where people shot at me. Maybe the second one might be more appropriate. So what I'm hoping to do this morning, I know we've got this mixture of students and members of the public, is that I'll try and give a really informal and practical talk. I'll try and take you into the world of what it's like being a foreign correspondent, particularly in a place like Afghanistan, where I spent the year last year. I'll talk a little bit about how journalists report from places like that, and a little bit about some of the things that I've learned along the way as a journalist in general. Towards the end of the presentation, we'll have a listen to one radio story and have a look at one television story, and I'll talk a little bit about those stories, how we got those stories, and you can have a look and see how they unfolded. They're both, stories that went to air, so they are imperfect stories. They're the best that you can do in the time that you have. So I'm sure, particularly with the students, there'll be some things that you think you would have done in a different way, and we can have those kind of discussions. The question time's really important, and please do ask questions at the end, and please don't be worried about coming up with a question that sounds a bit mysterious or impressive. We're not on Q&A. If you just want to say, can you please tell me more about whatever topic it is, you can steer me in that direction. Also, if there are any issues with sound or you can't see anything anyway through, please just put your hand up and we can try and rectify that. So this was my office and home last year in Kabul. A very short commute from home to work, as you can see, and very short back the other way. This was the ABC's Kabul bureau. This is 8 paces by 12 paces, which I know from practice. Given the hours that I was kind of working with lots of work in the evening, it just actually made sense to be in the same workspace rather than having to heat and organise another area because of the long working hours into the evening. This was the view from the window, quite spectacular. This was in a secure compound in Kabul, shared with other media organisations, so quite heavily secured, large blast walls, local Afghan guards, plus some foreign guards as well. So unless we were out filming something that needed to be done, I spent an enormous amount of time in that particular space. I've just blacked out. This is a picture of me and our Afghan producer from Kabul. I know because some of this footage may be going out online, we'll just protect his face. He's actually a young medical doctor from Afghanistan, and just happened to be that he really gets journalism. Some people understand journalism and some don't. He just has a natural gift for it. So his role as producer was to help set up the stories that we were doing, to translate interviews and come out with me on the stories. So that's effectively the staff photo for the ABC Kabul Bureau. It was just the two of us. There was no cameraman in the bureau. I was doing the filming, so it was a very small operation, one of the ABC's smallest bureaus in the world. So that's your 8 cents a day in action in Kabul. This is our neighbourhood in Kabul. This area, some of these houses in this particular area of Kabul belong to the rich and powerful over many regimes, some of whom had been funded, of course, by the opium industry. So quite a deal of drug money had gone through the pockets of some of the wealthy people. This area, there were lots of kind of lime green and apricot buildings. This style of gaudy architecture was nicknamed narcotecture because of the drug money that came through. So not really a style that you want to emulate. But that was our neighbourhood, our part of Kabul. Up on the roof of our building for broadcast, we need a secure area that we could broadcast from. So sometimes I would report at night from Kabul up on the roof, and there, even with the lights and so on, there was some sort of agreement that we never got any hassle from snipers or attacks. The insurgents knew very well where we were broadcasting from, but there were never any issues in that way. And of course, inside the compound, it was relatively secure and didn't need to wear a headscarf in that area. So these boxes are very, very important. They're hooked up to satellite lines. CNN and other organisations use similar setups to ours. So that's one of the ways that we were able to get the news out of Kabul. This tiny thing's only about the size of a laptop. This is called a BGAN. It's a small satellite phone, and this is what news crews use in the field. They're very nondescript looking things. They're actually a satellite dish, but they don't look like one. The one that I had in Africa, I'd always put it in my bag and cover it with my underwear in case my bag was getting searched, because border police would sort of reach that stage and kind of back off. So I'm sure I've got radioactive underwear from having it next to the satellite phone over many, many years. But they are quite a remarkable bit of gear. So in areas of Afghanistan and Pakistan where there was no internet or no mobile phone coverage, you can get television pictures out on that thing. You can use that to hook up to a phone. I can get on the net and surf the net as well. So that kind of technology is hugely important and makes journalists very, very mobile. So the technological aspect is hugely important. In terms of the workload of reporting from somewhere like Afghanistan, the workload is huge now. So for us at the ABC, as a journalist there, you're working across 11 radio and television programs, News 24 and ABC online. So it's almost as important to consider which programs you're not filing for as those that you are. And no can be a very, very important word. And for the budding journalists that we've got here, you will also be under multiple demands, and our approach always is to fit the main stories with the main programs. So you want to be on the biggest story that you can, hitting the biggest programs that you can. But we often have time clashes. So here in Australia, from about 5 o'clock in the afternoon through until 7 p.m, you can imagine we've got 5 p.m. radio news bulletin, 6 p.m. radio news bulletin, PM's on at 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock, and the television news is on at 7 o'clock as well. So there's big clashes of deadlines, which makes it very, very challenging now. No one's doing just one thing. The average workload in a day would normally be, if we're out on a story, one television story, which would also do for AM, and then probably 3 or 4 radio news stories and something for ABC News 24. So that's about a sort of 15 or 16 hour day to get all of that done. On busier days, you just go and go and go, and particularly with radio news, you'll just file each hour until the story stops or until you can't file anymore. So stories like the Mumbai terrorist attacks in India, which happened in about my second week in India, we just go through the night. So that story started at about 9 p.m. at night, and you just keep going all the way through the night and keep filing, I think until about 10 o'clock the next morning. But most journalists were up for about 36 to 40 hours in that initial phase. And of course you'll remember the terrorists from that attack. The understanding was that they were highly medicated for that attack because they were up for 3 or 4 or 5 days constantly. We couldn't keep up with them in terms of reporting. This is out in the field doing a piece to camera in Kabul. So when you don't have a cameraman, you've got to just set things up and then stand in front of the camera. Our camera's got a screen on it, so you can turn that around and roughly line yourself up in the shot. Being out and filming in the street in Kabul, we spend as little time on the street as possible because of the risk of attack and kidnap. So I'd put the microphone in the car, work out what I was going to say. We'd jump out. We knew certain areas of Kabul had particular sunlight at particular times of the day. So this was one of our afternoon spots that we would film in. Jump out, film the piece to camera really quickly, get back in the car and go, and almost have a roster of those locations. So we were never going to the same place on consecutive days to reduce the risk of kidnap. A lot of times out filming in the field, you can't use tripods. So for those of the journalism students who are doing filming, getting down low is a really steady and strong position to try and capture what's going on. This is filming some female police officers in Kabul. So you don't want to have the wobble cam as much as you can. Getting down and making almost a triangle using your knees and elbows is a really secure position. Out on embed with the soldiers, I spent a lot of time filming from the ground because I can't take the tripod out with me, and I know that's a flat kind of surface. So all of that to try and make the pictures as clear as possible is really important. You're always trying to find workarounds, ways that you can try and get a steady shot with as little gear as you possibly can. You can imagine out in the field, particularly in the rural areas of Afghanistan, if you turn up as a foreigner with a camera, huge crowds gather very quickly, and often is the case in Australia, and quite rightly in some cases journalists are regarded as being intrusive sometimes. In areas like this, people try and draw you closer into their world. They're so desperate to tell their story and get their issues and problems out. So it's very common for dozens and dozens of people to gather, and you might want to speak to 2 or 3 people, but many more will come out and want to get on camera. Now, Julie Pizzetti, this next slide is for you. Twitter, I had to mention it. Twitter was really, really important in Afghanistan. I was quite late coming onto Twitter, just simply basically because of a lack of hands. If you're trying to film, you've got your phone in your other hand trying to talk to radio, I just thought, how on earth would I also have time to use Twitter? I was also slightly delayed by when we were covering the Pakistan floods at the end of 2010, some people were talking about the coverage on Twitter, and one bloke got on and said that from our coverage that I looked like John Safran in a headscarf, was his remark. That probably delayed me from Twitter for a good 6 months or so. But Twitter was hugely important. In terms of information coming in, it would put us ahead by about 30 or 40 minutes on a story compared to the newswire. So if there was a blast in Kabul, things start coming up on Twitter. You can work out roughly which part of the city that blast happened and the extent of it. So information coming in is really important. Even the mayor of Kabul is on Twitter. He actually follows Lady Gaga. We checked out his followers, which was quite interesting. The military chiefs and the police chiefs from Afghanistan are on Twitter, and I'm sure some of you who follow Twitter really closely would have seen there have been Twitter wars. So the international security forces and the Taliban will get on Twitter after an attack and start chest thumping and trading insults and so on. So they're a special group of military people who are there ready to answer the call for Twitter. So we're seeing that propaganda war already go onto Twitter. In terms of us putting information out, once I got on, we would simultaneously break stories on radio and Twitter. So if we're about to break a story at 6 a.m. On Twitter, on radio, I would put the tweet out at the same time, and it was really fascinating to watch those stories travel. So on a big story, we would get another 400 or 500 followers in less than an hour on some occasions when those stories would fly. So it would certainly give us a lot more depth with our coverage. Even incidents in Pakistan and Afghanistan, things like earth tremors, there's an informal triangulation that goes on. So a friend in Islamabad will say they felt the tremor very strongly. We'll say we didn't feel it that much in Kabul. Someone else in another location. You can roughly work out where things are happening and if there was any damage from an earthquake very, very quickly and informally on Twitter. And because of the mobile phone coverage in Afghanistan, which is pretty good, you know, I've sat in the back of armoured vehicles tweeting close to the Pakistan border where there's barely any running water, but you can get up on Twitter. So how things have changed. This is the equipment for going out on an embed with troops. This is about as small and mobile as you can get now with the gear that we have. This weighs about 36 kilos in total. If you think a decade ago, this would be about 120 kilos and about 3 people. So the ability to move around now and get out and gather the news has changed enormously, and you can broadcast from almost anywhere. This was a tent that I was using out with the Australian troops, and could quite happily work and broadcast from there, sit in my sleeping bag, editing stories and be able to get them out. So that's huge. When I first began in Africa, we'd have to wait for a satellite dish to go into a location, and then all the journalists would go in. So now we can choose our stories. You might be from one network and want to go to one part of the country. I can choose to go to another. So that's given incredible flexibility. In terms of safety gear, in many areas going out with the troops, it requires to wear body armour. That weighs about 10 kilograms or so. And out on patrol, you then add into that obviously things like about 3 litres of water, the camera gear and other things. So it is quite a heavy load, but that gear is getting lighter. But you certainly need to be fit to head out with the troops, and they never want to have to carry you back for their own safety and effort. So I would literally train for those embeds to be ready to go. I'm not a big strong build, but I could walk far with them. So that kind of fitness is really important out in the field. But it allows you to get out to places that we previously couldn't reach. This is just near the border with Pakistan. These are areas you simply can't go without the military. There are a lot of debates about journalists embedding with the military, the kind of restrictions that may put in place. But I guess that's versus the option of not being able to get to certain parts of the country. So embedding with soldiers is not the story, it's simply part of the story, but it allows us to get into where things are going on. And, you know, Afghanistan's in a state of war. The war is a big part of the story. Going out in the field with the soldiers, how you manage your fear is very important, and it will determine whether you're able to go out and do that or not. This is some US Marines in Helmand. As I was following them out on patrol, you can see the guy with the rucksack, the Marine with the rucksack who's closest to the camera. That's a full stretcher that they take out with them because their risk of casualties was very high in that particular area. So you kind of, if you're heading out with them, you need to make sense in your own mind about how you deal with the fear. And the fear in that area is stepping on homemade landmines, improvised explosive devices. There are very few gunfights in that area. Basically nothing will happen or someone will step on something that explodes. So going out with them, the fear of being hurt was very high. And I think that particular trip was, I'm normally not too bad, but that was very borderline for me to be able to go out on patrol with them. About 5 minutes before I arrived at that base, one of their Marines had both of his legs blown off in an explosion, and I then arrived. And to head out with them into the same area, every step that you take, you fear that it may be the one. So they're a highly effective psychological weapon. They're basically two bits of wood that connect a circuit that you can step on. So you can take someone's legs or their life for about $10. They're pretty cheap weapon, but absolutely terrifying. The Marines in the front of the patrol they've got a metal detector and they mark the way with shaving cream, so you're always following the lines of shaving cream, which of course evaporates once the Marines have gone through. And even going around an obstacle, if you're trying to get around that tripod there, they will show you exactly which side you are to go around and which arc you are to take. So you're really watching your feet, and of course trying to film it at the same time is really hard, trying to get your eye on the camera and watch where you're stepping. So it's very frightening, and a number of journalists have, of course, been severely injured by those weapons. This is an Australian base in Uruzgan province in the south of the country. It's the compound that you can see in the middle of the slide with the tarpaulins and so on. This is one of the smallest bases that they had. The soldiers in this base had been living in very basic conditions. They hadn't showered for over 90 days, and the army engineers came through and said, look, we can do some improvements to this base and the new one that they were going to. Here's your choice, what would you like first? Would you like showers or internet? And the soldiers straight away said internet. That's what they wanted. And it actually says a lot about what's going on in the war at the moment. There's barely a soldier who goes away to war now without a laptop. Every soldier has a laptop for getting in communication with their families and also watching movies and so on. This observation post where this picture was taken from, and this main base, once they hooked up on the internet, they were able to play video games against each other from one tower to the other when they weren't on duty. War games, of course. What else would you want to play after being out on patrol all day? But it also allowed those soldiers to have communication with their family. One of the guys was busy selling his motorbike from back home on eBay from here. So haven't things changed? It really is important, that technology. This is very close to this base out in the field with the soldiers. We were filming a local farmer out in these fields, and he had a finch, a bird in a cage next to him while he was working, and I said to the interpreter, why has he got the bird in the cage with him? And he said, oh, he likes it. He likes the sound of it singing. He said, it's like an Afghan iPod, he said. So you can see, in some ways, reporting from Afghanistan, it's like reporting across time. It's not just like reporting from a different country, it's a different planet. Last year when I was there, it was Afghan New Year, and the local year was 1390, and you think in some parts of the country it almost is. You know, the gap in technology is huge. This is up in the north of the country. These are some women in a hut. Being a female reporter, having that technology that we've seen, being able to move around, but also being a female and being able to go into the homes where women are, often male reporters are restricted, it's hugely important. So it's almost like setting up a pipeline between Afghanistan and Australia and trying to get those stories through and getting feedback the other way. That was kind of the way that we looked at it, of trying to open that pipeline up and get the story from a little mud hut like this back to homes in Sydney or Canberra or other parts of the country. And again, you can see there's just huge need. People want to tell their stories. This is a classroom in northern Afghanistan. They had 70 kids in this one classroom. No desks, no chairs, and that's the situation that they're enduring. So they're desperate to tell people about what's going on and what their situation is. It's very hard to move by road to reach some of those locations, like up in the north that we've just seen. So moving around by air is really important. This is flying over Kabul. You can see how low slung and dusty the city is. So air travel is really, really important, both by helicopter, and this was on a United Nations fixed wing flight. We can get around with the military fairly easily. There's a lot of paperwork that needs to happen. Flying civilian you can do in Afghanistan, but it's risky then being outside the bubble, so movement is very restricted. This is the gear that we're using out in the field. The physical gear has become less important and the computer equipment has become really important. The gear that we have now, these kind of computers and the programs that we have for editing basically let me get to bed about 30 to 40 minutes earlier than I would have a decade ago because the equipment's so much faster. But of course what's happened at the same time with demands like ABC News 24 is we've gained that time and then lost it again. So that without that technology we actually wouldn't be able to do what we're doing now. So that gear is hugely important, and even if you're not a geek, you need to become a geek really quickly to survive out in the field with that kind of gear. One of the most important issues of being out in the field, particularly in a place like Afghanistan, is covering trauma and being very careful in dealing with your own trauma. This was the last suicide bomb that I covered 4 days before I left in December. This was a suicide attack on a Shia Muslim procession in Kabul at a shrine. People were gathered around and the women and children were off to the side next to a wall, and the suicide bomber detonated, and of course being close to the wall they got shocked several times more than others did. This was a 12-year-old girl just seconds after the blast who'd lost a number of members of her family. Very, very graphic, and often the most graphic things that we see we actually can't show on television. This image was on the front page of the New York Times. It was shot by Masoud Hosseini, who's a really brave local photographer. A brave choice by the New York Times as well. But had I shot that for television, I doubt that we could have used it. So what you see and what you broadcast are often two very different things. The ABC is regarded as one of the world leaders for dealing with trauma in journalism. We have a really good system set up of counsellors that we can use, and also the peer group pressure has completely changed. So a decade ago no one talked about it, we didn't actually really know what it was, and now after you cover a story like this, your mates are on the phone saying, have you spoken with someone, how are you going? People are really checking on each other. So after every big story, large story like this, I would always speak with the counsellor that I was assigned over the phone to talk through what had happened, because I don't know what will happen the next day. I need to have the slate cleared all the time. So you can't really tell, but hopefully I've come out of that without any lasting detrimental effects. Another big issue, of course, if you're working as a video journalist, is that you are working alone a lot of the time. When big networks like CNN go out embedding with soldiers, they go as four. They go as a cameraman, a producer, a correspondent and a security advisor. They always nickname him the sound man who doesn't do sound. He just sort of tags along, and his job is to apply first aid and look after that team. So it is heavy going on your own. You're smaller, you're more flexible and able to move around, but there's not really anyone to talk to at the end of the day when incidents like that have happened. So it's something very, very important to manage. And for the young would-be journalists that we have with us, this is not just something that goes on in war zones. If you're the ABC journalist at Mildura and you're covering a big car accident or whatever, nothing will destroy your career quicker than if you are exposed to trauma and you don't deal with it. You won't be able to sleep, let alone work. So it is hugely, hugely important. I wouldn't go out with a broken camera into the field. I don't go out as a broken reporter. My best thing that I can do is report as well as I possibly can, of no use to myself or anyone else if I'm deeply traumatised. So that's a huge thing. So that's a bit of a snapshot of Afghanistan. I'm coming up to my 19th year with the ABC, which made me feel very old knowing that there are journalism students here. So my random kind of collection of tips and advice to you, I decided to title Tips from a Journo Nana, because I'm feeling a bit old. See if you can spot the difference between this is what will happen if you stay out in the field too long. So I just wanted to run through briefly some of the things that I've kind of learned along the way. The first thing is that wherever you are sent, out on your first job or your second job or beyond that, whether you're starting off in the regions in the ABC, as I did and many others, why not be the best journo where you are? So if you're sent out as the ABC journo in Dubbo, compete. Why not be the best journo in Dubbo? Why not have the paper following you rather than you following them? It's a lot more interesting and a lot more challenging to try and get out in front. So have a go. So that's my sort of opening tip is be the best journo in Dubbo. If that's where you're sent, then go for it. If your pattern is always following the local paper rather than them following you, you will forever be chasing their tail. So if you're using other journalists as your primary source of information, you are in a deal of trouble. Get out in front and lead and see how you can go. And you owe it to your audience as well to push out in front. I was given this advice before I was sent to Africa, and that is never be afraid to play catch up. If you miss a story, and you will, and we do, sometimes it can be quite paralysing and you're feeling very fearful of what your executive producers or others will say. Just get on with it. You've missed one, it happens, get on to the next phase of the story, but it's very, very easy to get frozen by that if someone has outscooped you, but it happens. The best way to get a story is to do a story. Chris Masters, who was with Four Corners, was a great advocate of not being a story snob. Every story can lead to something else, and we certainly found in Afghanistan, if you do a story on something, other stories will come your way. So we did a lot of asylum seeker stories, and once people back home heard that we were doing that, we would get more contacts come in. That would lead to another story. We would meet someone else. So get out there. You're not going to find that many stories sitting at your desk. Get out there, get number one underway, and it will lead to number two and go on further from there. The next bit of information is about safety, and particularly young journalists heading out. It can be difficult to gauge risks, or you want to take some big risks to get your name out there. That's fine, but as the saying goes, dead journos don't write many stories. So you can go out there and be a hero and think it's all going to work out, but you could end up being the story. So it's a very fine line. We take calculated risks, and I've certainly taken my share, but it's not going to achieve anything, let alone the distress that you'll cause to others. So is it worth it? Is the story that you're covering worth it? The one that we talked about earlier, if you experience trauma, get some help, and it's out there. And even if you think you don't need it, get it anyway. So often after coming off assignments in Pakistan and Afghanistan, I'd ring the counsellor and sort of have a bit of a joke and say, look, I don't actually think you're going to get paid for this session because I think I'm fine because of this reason, this and this and this. But we would talk through it anyway because you just never know what's coming your way. You would imagine if you went out gathering material as a journalist for a year and never filed any of those stories, what a mess of notebooks and tapes and video footage it would be. It's the same with trauma. after each assignment you need to get it out, get it dealt with and move on. Otherwise you'll get yourself into all sorts of trouble. The next one is the 27 blues. Now as you start off as a young journalist, it can be really difficult when you start off, but largely you'll be supported in your first few years. The stage when many of us have found it most difficult is about 26, 27, 28, when you've done that, got that initial time under your belt, and if you're a risk taker in terms of your career, you're trying to push forward, this can be a really difficult time. And I know from a number of colleagues, we're actually talking about it earlier this week. I was in Adelaide at this stage, and I jumped from being a rural reporter to a national current affairs reporter, probably about 6 or 12 months early, but that's when the job came up. And I went from being competent to being in all sorts of trouble. I was convinced that I would be sacked because I was struggling so much. I was out of my depth. My mission used to be just to get from the Adelaide newsroom down across the street to my car and then sort of melt into a mess. And it wasn't even trying to get a good story, it was just to get a story that was acceptable. There were about 4 or 5 months where I just kept missing the target. It was like, I just want to get a story that's okay. So that, you know, if you're pushing hard and you want to be a high flyer, no one will be putting more pressure on you than you, and you need to watch that. You wouldn't let a bully get out of control. Don't let yourself get out of control either. So really watch that. And if you have that bump, you will get through it. In the ABC, in ABC terms, if you were pushing to be a foreign correspondent, you're probably at that age a couple of years before you would first be able to head off, and there are a lot of people competing and pushing. I think we've got about 800 people in ABC News and about 20 correspondents, so you're basically trying to get in about the top 5%, so it's enormously competitive, very difficult. Remember the 2 books. I know we've gone a bit electronic now, but when you're out there in the field, the 2 most important books that you have, even if that you end up putting them on your iPhone, are your contact book and your diary. If you run those 2 things really well, you're not going to go too far wrong. So if you're a rural and regional journalist, you've got a really tight diary of what's coming up, who's in court, who's visiting the region, things you're going to follow up, and you've got a great contact book, you're going to start breaking news. You really can't go wrong. And call your contacts even when there's nothing going on. That's really important. Call them up to say g'day and see what's going on. That will help you when you arrive in a news region initially. Resilience, resilience, resilience. This is really important. So if you end up in parts of your career where you're really struggling, the way that you talk to yourself about your failures, and there will be failures, is really, really important. That will determine whether you kick on or not. So trying to be a correspondent with the ABC, most people don't get it on their first go. I got it after the 4th go. Friends were the 6th attempt to the 8th attempt. And you can imagine after missing out 3 times, it's really easy to say to yourself things like, if I was any good, I would have got it by now. I must be hopeless. I should just give up and go and do something else. I'm never going to get there. I'm doing things wrong, all of that. Whereas the other way of thinking about it is, no one gets it on their first go. I must be getting closer. I'm going to go and find out some feedback about why I didn't get this one, all that sort of thing. So that stuff is really, really, really important. And even now, from the beginning until now, that's hugely important. When I left uni in the early 90s and started getting work from when I was here, that was 22 job applications in a row before I got one. So you can imagine in that situation as well, you could easily talk yourself down that after 22, you just obviously don't have what it takes to be a journalist. Or another way to think is that I will prove them wrong, and it's kind of worked out all right, so just hang in there. Yeah. Look for the gaps. There's a fantastic young journalist called Nick McKenzie from Fairfax, and he was barely 20-something when I actually learned this from him. He was in Melbourne as a very, very young journalist and started covering police corruption down there and broke some huge stories. He still looked like a teenager when he was doing it. I said to him, how on earth did you start doing those stories? And he said, oh, I just looked around and no one else was doing it, so I thought I'd do it, he said. And I don't think initially they took him seriously, and he absolutely went through them. He's an amazing investigative journalist. So that was really smart on his part. If you're in a big newsroom, see what other people are not doing and jump in and grab that, because you can get a bit lost as a young journo heading in. And just finally, my last thought would be is reputation is everything, and everything else feeds in to that. If you're a bit dodgy as a journalist, your contacts will dry up very, very quickly. The way that you deal with people is important, and sometimes you may need to go in very, very hard. You can get respect from pushing in hard, other times you need to back off. Our ABC colleague Paul Lockyer, who we lost last year, one of the things that was said about Paul was that it's one thing to go to a town and do a story, but it's another thing to be able to go back, and Paul was always welcomed back. So reputation, not only for your own sense of integrity and well-being, but yeah, no one will talk with you if your reputation is damaged for good and for bad. So that's hugely important. All right, we're running short of time. What I'm going to do just quickly is we're going to have a quick listen to part of a radio story and then to a television story. The radio story we're going to have a listen to is from Kabul from last year. It's a story about maternal deaths in Afghanistan. This is a story we initially tried to do for television, but because of the privacy issues for women, we were unable to film it. So we left it for a while and went back and did it as a radio story. This story is set in the largest maternity hospital in Kabul. It's one of these stories where it's an ongoing issue, but it's something that's very important to be told. We'd heard that women at the hospital were being beaten while they were giving birth, and we wanted to do a story about what was going on there. So that's how this eventuated. So we'll just have a listen to this. This is just part of the story. It runs for about 4 minutes or so.
You're about to take a step into the world that many Afghan women endure. We've been given rare access inside the delivery room at the Malala Hospital. Banafsha is minutes away from delivering her daughter. The midwives abuse Banafsha, accusing her of being too slow. More than 130 babies are born here every day. Some women are only given half an hour to deliver. You can hear the midwives slapping Banafsha on her pregnant belly to speed up the contractions. If Australian midwives did the same, they would be stood down and could even face criminal charges. Now she pushes as her daughter's head finally emerges, followed by a limp body. The baby looks deathly white and motionless. The midwife cuts the cord and rushes down the corridor, carrying the newborn girl face down along her arm. When the nurse reaches the neonatal ward, the doctors take over. They use a suction tube and a foot pump to try and open the baby's airway. The baby has swallowed feces or meconium during the traumatic delivery and now has severe asphyxia. She's still not breathing. It's many more minutes before the baby finally coughs out her first cry. Her skin colour starts to change from white to blotchy pink. Her arms and legs begin to move. She weighs in at 4 kilograms, a big baby for Afghanistan. The doctors are relieved for now.
It's very beautiful.
She is beautiful. She's a big girl. Fathers are not allowed inside the hospital, so the guard at the front gate announces that Banafsha's baby has arrived. In the baby's first minute of life, she was given only 2 out of 10 on what's known as the APGAR score of newborn health. In Australia, a baby in this condition could be sent to intensive care. But only 3.5 hours after she's born, her father orders the baby and Banafsha to be discharged because he doesn't want to wait anymore. Neonatal doctor Nourzia Sharifi is worried the baby could die of infection or have brain damage from the asphyxia.
If the newborn is a girl, they don't pay much attention to her. They won't let the mother and baby stay in hospital for a few days so we can take care of them. But if the newborn is a boy, the relatives touch the feet and hands of the doctors, begging for us to keep the baby boy in hospital. They want us to give him the best treatment.
Despite the gains made since the fall of the Taliban, Afghanistan remains one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a mother. The average Afghan woman is dead by the age of only 44. Dr. Nourzia Sharifi is struck by the loss of opportunities and talent that Afghanistan so desperately needs.
The baby girls born here, many have potential, they are intelligent and alert, but no one cares about them. Even if they try to go ahead in the future, their talents are strangled by the situation in this country.
This is Sara in Kabul for PM.
Okay, so that's just an example of a radio story from the field, particularly for the journalism students. You can hear that the sound is really important. So the sound, like the foot pump and so on. I just followed this child and followed this birth, getting the sound as the announcement was made outside. So even though it's a radio story, you're making pictures with the sound and your description of what's happening. So kind of put that sound together and write around it. I can't change the sound that's there, I can change my words. So that gathering of sound is hugely important. If we'd done that in a dry way, just with interviews and so on, you don't get any sense of being able to picture of what's there. We're running short of time. We'll just briefly run through a television story from the field. This is a story from out on the front line in eastern Afghanistan, near the border with Pakistan. This is during an embed with US soldiers. Just to give you a picture of where this is a base that's surrounded by mountains, so the insurgents shoot into the base almost on a daily basis. If you're embedded with the US military, the question you're often asked when they're trying to work out where to send you is they'd say, "Ma'am, do you want kinetic or non-kinetic?" And kinetic means you want to be shot at or not shot at. This base was kinetic, very kinetic. So you have some choice about where you're going to go. As a journalist, again, balancing the risk but also wanting to get a good story. The thing to remember with this story is that 90% of the gunfire is going out of the base, not coming in, and that was the whole point of this story, showing how uneven the conflict was. So the Taliban go up on the hills behind the base, fire a few shots with a 100-year-old rifle, and then the Americans dropped a 2,000-pound bomb on their heads. So the enemy can work very cheaply and quickly. The response from the other side is expensive and quite intense. So the whole point of this story was to show that. There was no military ground lost and won. The rule that we normally have in television stories is you show your best pictures first. In this case, we didn't. The best pictures, I guess, are the shooting, but that would not be reflecting truly on what happened. What really happened was I was there for 5 days. For 4 days, nothing happened. I filmed everything I could, and then on the last day, the base got attacked 4 times in 8 hours. So to be representative, you kind of need to build the tension up of what happened and to show how kind of futile it is in a way. Just before we kick off, the students who are doing videos, stuff to look out for in this story. So you imagine you have 4 days on a base filming everything that you can. So you do all your interviews, you film all the landscape shots that you have no idea what's going to kind of happen next. It's difficult to walk around this base during the day because of the gunfire, so most of the base comes to life at night. So I actually borrowed one of the soldiers' night vision pods and shoved that in front of the camera to be able to film at night. And then film kind of issues, you need to go from day shots to night shots. So you'll see there are pictures of the moon there. We had a big bright moon. That's a way to kind of transition from the daytime shots into the night. So you need to be thinking all the time of the pictures that you have and those those that you'll get. Pieces to camera in this story on the tripod on your own, or the other way to film when the shooting starts, just to hold the camera in front of you. It's good having long arms sometimes, it worked for me. So that's kind of how this story happens. It just goes for 5 minutes, so we'll have a look at that quickly.
Billions of dollars. 10 years on from the September 11 terrorist attack, the United States and its allies are still locked in combat against insurgents in Afghanistan. The war has claimed thousands of lives and cost billions of dollars. Afghanistan correspondent Sara reports from the front line at combat outpost Hurtle King in eastern Afghanistan.
This is the fault line of the war in Afghanistan. US troops keep watch in the remote eastern province of Kunar. This land has been fought over for centuries.
Anyone who came to Afghanistan to teach an Afghan to fight is a fool. The Afghan has nothing to learn in terms of warfare.
Combat outpost Hurtle King breaks the rules of traditional tactics. Instead of taking the high ground, the soldiers are in the valley so they can be closer to the local people. That leaves the outpost exposed to gunfire from above.
This base is surrounded by a crown of mountains. The insurgents are able to get up high and shoot into the base. They can also hide behind the ridges and fire mortars and other weapons. All of that makes it very challenging for the soldiers who are trying to defend this piece of ground.
The base is often attacked several times a day. The enemy hits hard from a distance and runs.
The weapon systems that he's engaging you with, at the range he's engaging you with, it's almost, it's just like a display, really. It's a sound effect.
This is what it sounds like. Gunmen open fire on Hurtle King from 2 directions. US soldiers hit back hard. They pour hundreds of rounds into the hillside.
The insurgents have just started firing from up on the ridge again. The US troops are returning fire from their battle positions just behind here. This has been the heaviest contact of the day so far.
It's the 4th time the base has been attacked in the past 8 hours. The troops use mortars to target the insurgents taking cover in the folds of the mountains. Often the gunmen are difficult to see.
My main concern when that first kicks off is to try and fix the enemy, find out where they're at, fix them, and then finish them.
Hurtle King was named after 2 soldiers who were killed when a neighbouring base was overrun by insurgents. But the troops here are confident they have the firepower to fight their way out of trouble, despite the terrain. A US jet roars above as a warning to the Taliban gunmen.
It's somewhat intimidating when you first get here, but once you realize where the enemy come from and where they're moving around at, you can kind of key in on those areas and pull most security out in that direction.
US choppers keep watch as fighter pilots drop a 2,000-pound bomb. The barrage costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sometimes it's just night by night. The base comes to life after dark because the risk of being shot at during the day can be so high. This is what it looks like through the night vision equipment the soldiers use.
Well, during the day, since we're surrounded by mountains and high ground, we can take contact from any location, north, south, east, and west, and we have.
Much of the maintenance work is carried out under the cover of darkness. The soldiers know that when the sun comes up, the gunfire can come from anywhere.
We get hit from over here, We get hit from over there. We get hit, let me just do this. We get hit from here.
All around.
All around. There hasn't been a spot that we haven't gotten fire from.
Daylight brings another attack. The commander of the Afghan troops fighting alongside the Americans points to where the fire is coming from. When the Americans go, the Afghans will be left to hold this ground. It's very difficult to get supplies to a remote location like this one, and many items don't even make it halfway from Kabul because of theft and corruption. Out here, logistics are regarded as just as important as tactics. The Americans have faith in the Afghan troops if they're given the support they need from their own chain of command.
These guys get it. These guys are out here on the front lines. They understand this war. Now, if we can just get it to where they're getting supported to the level that they need to be, independent of American forces, then that's what winning looks like in 2014.
Well, thank you very much. I know we're running slightly over time, but I'll take any questions that there are. Thank you very much for taking the time to come out this morning. It's been lovely to come back to Canberra Uni after so long. Yeah, I'll be open to any questions, but thank you very much. Thank you.
Get Sally to answer some questions now. If my voice holds out, I'm going to be directing traffic. I certainly didn't want to cut Sally off. I'm sure you'll agree that was both educational and incredibly inspiring, just to be able to see and hear what goes on in the field, as distinct from what we consume as viewers. So who would like to ask the first question? And as I said at the beginning, I'm going to prioritise some of my students in the first instance. Who has a question for Sally? Yep, okay, I'll start there and then here.
So, what was that first job that you left uni for?
Just asking about the first job. I was doing work experience at ABC 666 here, and I was sitting in the manager's office when a call came through from a community radio station at Burke, looking for a presenter for their morning program, and I'd never presented. So it was Steve Ahern, who was the manager here, who said, you can use the studio at night when we're off air and see if you can work it out, how to be a presenter. If you're not, we'll just call them up and say you're a producer. So I had the keys to the studio at night and kind of worked it out, and then drove up to Burke and heard the program for the first time on the Friday and presented it on the Monday. So yeah, it was a bit of a leap of faith. Yeah, I remember I was staying in the motel in Burke, and the night before I had to go on air, they had synthetic kind of blankets in the motel, and I was tossing and turning so much there were like sparks going off. I was so nervous. So yeah, really nervous.
Which I could just add as the lecturer, going bush and doing time in a community or regional station in Whoop Whoop, if necessary, is absolutely vital. You don't get to be a Sally Sara without doing that kind of work. It is really important. Lauren.
I don't know if you've heard, but as of next year, they're changing the structure of the journalism degree here at UC. So do you think that replacing 6 journalism practice units with general communications units is a good idea? So if, personally, is the ABC looking for someone who's had more journalism practice at university or more communication theory?
Look, I won't jump into the internal issues for the uni. I think whichever way you go, you need to have a connection with the workplace. So whether that's through what you're studying or work experience, that's for you. I actually did communications as my undergraduate, not even journalism, and I kind of bridged the gap through work experience. Look, you need to have some understanding of the world, but you also need to be able to have some skills and hit the ground running. And now also they're looking more carefully at those other issues of things like resilience and so on that maybe didn't catch people initially. Like I got down as far as the top 8 for ABC cadetships, but couldn't get one. And those who did have kind of moved on and done other things. So it's the measures or the selection criteria are sometimes they catch the right people and sometimes they don't. So yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I'm just wondering, you were saying about the trauma footage and things. What factors did you need to consider about what you could show and what you could film?
Yeah, just asking about trauma and things that we could show and things that we couldn't. Some things I'd send the footage through to Sydney and they would make a decision about whether it was okay or not, but other things I wouldn't even bother to send. So there was an attack on the International Security Force compound in Kabul last year, and one of the suicide attackers, his body was brought in a ute past where I was, and I got the shot, which, you know, journalistically you got it, but I knew there was no way we could use that. Yeah, just hard to tell. We're probably a bit more conservative than some of the European or Middle Eastern media outlets. Radio, you can go a lot further, and sometimes it can be more powerful hearing and not seeing. We would have had to have all sorts of warnings, not that we could, but had we filmed, you know, women being slapped and abused, giving birth, but for radio you can do it. So sometimes, you know, you've got all these programs you've got to file for, which is a curse in one way, but it also means there's a home for everything. So you think, well, I can't do that for TV, but I can write about it for online, or I can do it for something else. So there's a home for everything now, from a 30-second radio story right through to a half-hour foreign correspondence.
Sally, with your raw material, do you have a rough idea of the story you're going to do, or do you send that raw material back to the ABC and they just determine which direction it's
Just
going to
asking
go?
about raw material. So say for that television story there, the 4 days where nothing happened at the base, I filmed everything I could, cut all the sound bites out of the interviews as best I could. For a 7:30 report story, it's about 10 sound bites roughly, including your piece to camera, so you know how much more you need to get across the line. And I would then send through a slightly fat version of that story, file it through, and then let them cut down. So enough that they've got enough, but you can also kind of keep control if you don't send them too much. So I knew how I wanted the story to look. And also costs of sending footage via satellite or internet. You don't want to send too much. So I never did a final edit, but they had very clear instructions. I would cut it all in order, so like the transition shots, and they could see clearly what we were doing. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, question.
When you arrive in Kabul or anywhere else, how do you go about finding the people that you're going to interview for? I know journalists can sometimes be on the outside, but how do you get into that hospital and how do you find those personal interest stories?
Yeah, we're just asking about when you arrive in a place like Kabul, how do you make contacts and find people in places? Your local producer or your fixer, as they usually, is really important. And some people say the golden rule for, well, the 3 most important things for foreign reporting is fixer, fixer, fixer. They are your local connection, so that's really, really important. In Afghanistan, they don't use the term fixer because it kind of means pimp. So I wasn't employing one of those. But everywhere else, that's what it's known as. But it's just an offensive word there for whatever reason.
Any students up the back? Anyone at all? No, they've gone. Okay. Up here. Yep.
You mentioned earlier about the how much you can and can't show. Do you believe that the general public should have access to everything you film? Or do you think there is actually a line?
I guess just asking what we can and can't show. The ABC as a broadcaster, we have some legal restrictions on what we can show. If you get on YouTube, like things like the Syrian uprising, you can see everything. And I think the strongest bit of footage I saw from Syria, they had a guy who'd been caught in an explosion he was missing his face from his top lip down to his neck. You might have seen that, sitting up, still conscious. I mean, we could never show that, but now with footage coming out from citizen journalists and citizens, that kind of stuff is around, and I guess people go on YouTube not at their peril is not the right term, but they use their own responsibility of what they're going to see. But as a broadcaster, particularly in a 7:30 time slot, some of that can be quite heavy going, I guess, but that'll change. Freelance cameramen, it's really interesting to talk with them about, they know if they're with a German broadcaster, they can show this. If they're with a Middle Eastern, they can show this. If they're with American, they can show that. So there are quite boundaries there. And obviously as a journalist, why, if you know you can't show a particular thing, why go and expose yourself to that and film that for no reason? So yeah, it becomes a bit, you become a little bit sort of not hardened, but you become used to seeing those sort of things. So the body of the suicide attacker that I saw, we knew he was coming in on the ute. I was ready filming, and as a suicide attacker, I was expecting to be in halves. He wasn't. He'd obviously just been shot or something. So I filmed him, and there was a security guy next to me, a British guy, and I said, "Oh, actually, the body doesn't look too bad, like for what I was expecting." And he said to me, "Mate, he doesn't look that bloody well either." So, well, yeah, okay, clearly. But you just kind of, you get used to what's going on and your expectations of what it'll be. But yeah, why expose yourself to, if you're the ABC journal, Mildura or whatever, why go filming bits of car accident that you know you'll never ever be able to show, but maybe in your mind for longer than you ever intended. So that's a balance as well. Yeah.
Question over here, somebody's been trying. We're moving to the general audience now.
Work-life balance, exercise program in an 8x8.
Yep.
What are you doing? You're a runner.
Yes.
How do you maintain your...
Just asking about exercise and work-life balance. So we had a gym in the basement of our architecture house, and that was, it could have just as well been called the mental health centre, because you got to run or do something when you're cooped up. So I did that every day. Kabul's at altitude, which makes it really hard, and the security guys in our compound, many of them were ex-SAS, so they don't find normal life quite challenging enough. So our treadmill, even on zero, was set like that. So when I'd go overseas after being in Kabul, I was in Austria. There just were not enough roads in Austria to cater for me after being on this thing. You have hearts and lungs like a sort of Ethiopian altitude runner. So it's hugely, hugely important, not only to be fit for embed, but just to, after doing that radio story with the women being, I'm just boiling at the end of that, and you've got to just let it out somehow. So just go to the gym and let rip. And the guys would do circuits for us sometimes as well. So, and they were all hyperactive, and that was quite good. So there's, we've got the treadmill set on 16. That's mental. They'll say it's like, yeah, that is mental. So you almost go flying off the back of it. But all that's really important. And people are getting better with that now. But I certainly saw plenty of journalists in Kabul who were deeply traumatised, who would get carried home unconscious from the pub, and they weren't drinking to dance and have a good time, they were drinking to cry. They were a mess. So I would never want to go down that path. Yeah.
To obliterate. Somebody in the middle, tried several times to raise their hand. Yep, okay, I don't know if it was you, David, isn't it? Yes. Go for it.
Sally, are you conversant or fluent indeed in a second language, and were you able to speak with the Afghan locals in their own country?
Just asking about language. I learnt Zulu when I was in South Africa. I initially went to South Asia to India, which would have been Hindi, and then we spent most of our time in Pakistan, which was Urdu, and then into Afghanistan was Dari, Pashto, Tajik, whatever else. So there wasn't really one language that would fit there. My producer spoke Dari, Pashto, Urdu, Hindi, a little bit of Tajik and a few other things. So we're quite heavily reliant on them. If you can go to a place where one language will kind of fit all, it's good, but you just don't have time if you haven't learnt it before. And that risk of, I want to be the Delhi correspondent, I'll go and learn Hindi. Well, you'll end up getting sent somewhere else. I learned Arabic initially because I thought I was going to Jerusalem. I ended up in Joburg. So, yeah, it's quite common. Yeah, but like Stephen McDonald, who's in China for us, he speaks Mandarin really fluently, and that's a big thing for him. So, just depends. Yeah.
Okay, other questions? Yeah, done first.
Good, a civilian. Asking about news releases, and a lot of journalists seem to be reliant on media releases and news releases. We didn't get many in Kabul. I guess it depends what kind of journalism you're in. And now under 24-hour pressure, a lot of things kind of get churned through, I guess. So Being a regional journalist and then being a correspondent I probably prayed for more to come across my desk, to be honest, than we got, so we didn't get many. But I mean, primary source journalism will also always, yield the most extraordinary stories. But sometimes it's looking at a press release and seeing the gap. So, yeah. Just asking if there's a responsibility on journalists to use their training to kind of pull apart those media releases. Yeah, there is. Issue of looking for the gaps that we were talking about earlier. When I was in Delhi, it's not only news releases but wire stories. There was a story on the wires saying that an Australian man had been arrested in India on passport offences and child sex offences. It was a story about that long. And that rang huge alarm bells with us, and that turned into a 7-month investigation for us, for Four Corners, because just right from the beginning you could see something was clearly not right, and there was obviously a trail behind this fellow. So if people are looking for the gaps, they can actually be fodder for quite fantastic stories. And the sort of cliche up at Parliament is Friday afternoons when the most interesting things are dropped, about 5 o'clock. So people who look through those carefully will get a good story. Yeah.
We'll take 2 more questions, then we need to wind it up. Okay, over here. Yes, you. Sorry, I don't know your name.
Just out of the corner. I'm not a journalist. I'm not involved in negotiations here.
Sorry, sorry. 2 on the go. Sorry.
Yeah, up the back.
Oh,
yeah, you. Sorry, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, just asking about the story with the women in the hospital, choosing that kind of story. Those kind of stories are difficult to sell to your editor because women will be slapped on the belly last week, next week, the year before, the year after. So why are we doing this story today? And I guess the other question is, why are we not doing this story today? And it's similar with other humanitarian stories, like the situation in Darfur was unfolding when I was in Africa, and it was hard to get that. They always say they want to peg. What do I peg this story on? It was hard to convince them that now's when we need to go. So that can be quite tricky, and sometimes maybe CNN or BBC or New York Times will put some focus on a story and then everyone quickly follows. But I just felt with that story, that's a part of life in Afghanistan. Women and children make up 3/4 of the population. In addition to covering the political manoeuvres, we should be covering that. That's the most dangerous thing an Afghan woman can do. If a 747 was going down every week full of women and babies, there would be an outcry, but because it happens gradually, birth by birth, we don't report it. So that was my view, but always to be careful not to overstep the line as an activist. You just simply put the story out and take a step back from it. But I think those stories are still, really important. Do we only just cover that when UNICEF releases a report on infant mortality or maternal deaths or that sort of thing? So yeah, it's a really interesting question.
Okay, down the front.
Good question. I saw your picture about your journalist grandma
Yep.
picture, and I had to laugh about that because I've been thinking about similar issues myself recently.
Yeah.
Have you given much thought about your next 10 years or 20 years, particularly your experience for the last 20 years? Because I'm sure it wasn't what you expected.
Yeah.
When you started.
Yeah.
And you come to here.
I'm just sort of asking about what comes next. I'm not sick of journalism yet, and I don't have any feeling of that. I think starting out as a journalist, I had a very strong feeling from day one at the ABC that I wanted to be a correspondent, but an equal feeling that I could never do that. So it was sort of self-confidence and doubt. I remember they released a book with stories from all the ABC correspondents when I was starting out. I read the stories once, I read the profiles of the reporters hundreds of times, trying to work out how they got there, trying to work out what the path was. So I'm a little bit surprised that it's happened and a little bit not surprised that it's happened. In terms of the time ahead, I'm really not sure. I've just moved into a place in Sydney and I was talking to some friends and I said it's going to be really hard to go out there again after your lifestyle just gradually whittles away until you find yourself in a room 8 by 12 and that becomes acceptable and you live a happy life, and then you come out of it and you realise other things you've been missing out on. So I don't know. I'll know when I need to go out there again, but certainly not now. And the risk thing as well. I think I had a safe year in Afghanistan. How many times do you keep playing your cards? I'm not religious, but I keep thinking it's almost arrogant to keep getting through unscathed and then I want to play again and again and again and again. People who play for a long time get hit eventually, so I feel a bit conscious about that. And to be honest, Afghanistan freaks me out now that I'm out. When you're inside the violence, it's normal and you don't remember what normal looks like, and then you come out and you shudder, and I shudder now. So yeah. It frightens me.
Which I think is one of the, can I just say, Sally, one of the most compelling things about your sort of witness to journalism is that you've been in and out of trauma and you've dealt with it, and you're still willing to share those experiences. It's that capacity to talk rather than drink.
Yeah, not very good. I'm the only journalist who doesn't drink wine, so.
Which is really important. I'm going to ask the last question to wind up, and that question really is geared towards my students here. So you're a University of Canberra journalism student, you may have 1, 2 or 3 years to go. What's the most important thing for you to do if what you want to be is a working journalist?
Work experience. Yeah. I don't know what the restrictions are now with insurance and other things, but work experience in terms of what you need to do, in terms of what you need to have, you need to be resilient. So I remember after the 22nd job that I missed out on, when I have big thoughts to be thought, I get in the shower. I remember I got knocked back from that job. I got into the shower in tears, I'm never going to make it. By the time I got out of that shower, I was still wrapped in a towel when I organised the work experience, the next lot of work experience that led to me getting a job. So, and even now, when things go wrong, I'm straight in the shower, and that's my thing. So I know that's not ecologically or politically correct place to be doing having long thinking, but whatever it is for you, you go for a walk, you do whatever, that resilience, because unless you're really lucky, you're not going to get things first time. So you've got to work out how you bounce back, and you've got to really, really want it. Yeah. Whatever, you might be a magazine feature writer, a sub-editor, a camera person, a correspondent, a food writer, whatever it is that floats your boat, whichever area you'll know, then pursue that, because it's a long time to be bored if you're doing something you hate. Yeah.
And you clearly still love what you do.
Yeah.